If your nonprofit applies for grants, you might be taking on legal risks without even realizing it. Welcome to our explainer on multi-state fundraising. Today, we're going to break down a really crucial question. Do grant applications actually count as charitable solicitation?
This explainer is brought to you by Ironwood Registrations, a firm that's dedicated to helping nonprofit leaders and finance teams navigate these exact kinds of issues. So let's dive right in and get to the heart of it.
All right, so here's the big question so many nonprofits run into. You're getting grants from foundations, corporations, government programs. It's a huge part of how you operate, right? But does applying for those grants actually count as charitable solicitation? To put it another way, if you apply for a grant in another state, do you all of a sudden need to register there?
Well, as you've probably guessed, and it's so often the case in compliance, the answer is it depends. Yeah, it's not a simple yes or no. The real key here is figuring out who is providing the funding. So let's unpack the two main categories you need to know about.
Okay, but before we get into the nitty-gritty of grants, we have to get on the same page about what states actually mean by charitable solicitation. This is the bedrock, the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about.
So at its most basic level, charitable solicitation is just any time a nonprofit asks for a charitable contribution. And here's the thing. Most states have laws that say, hey, if you're going to ask our residents for money, you need to register with us first. It's really all about consumer protection.
And this definition covers a lot of ground. We're talking about all the usual suspects: big fundraising campaigns, email and mail appeals, ads asking for contributions, fundraising events, even that Donate Now button on your website. All of those things are considered direct requests for contributions, and they all fall under these laws.
Okay, so now let's take that definition and apply it to grants. This right here is probably the most important distinction we're going to cover. The big takeaway is that not all grants are created equal in the eyes of the law.
And here you can see that critical divide really clearly. On one side, you've got government grants. These are generally not treated as charitable solicitation. But on the other side, you have private grants from foundations or corporations, and these may be treated as solicitation. The whole thing really boils down to one simple question. Are you participating in a public funding process, or are you asking a private entity for a charitable contribution?
All right, let's tackle the exception first: government grants. So why do these get a pass? Why are they treated differently?
The key word here is procurement. See, when you apply for a government grant, states don't look at it as a donation request. They see it as you participating in a formal public process to get public funds for a specific purpose. It's just a completely different legal category.
And this applies pretty much across the board. We're talking federal grant programs, state agency opportunities, even local city and county funding. Because these all come from government funding programs, they generally don't trigger that charitable solicitation registration requirement.
Okay, now for the other side of the coin, private grants. And this is where the rule, not the exception, usually kicks in.
This really sums it up perfectly. A private foundation or a big corporation, it doesn't matter how large, they're still considered a member of the public from a legal standpoint. So when you send them a grant proposal, what you're legally doing is asking a private entity for a charitable contribution.
So what does that mean in practice? It means that your requests to private foundations, to corporate foundations, even to corporate community giving programs, they can all potentially be seen as charitable solicitation. And that, of course, has some pretty significant compliance implications.
So why does this distinction matter so much? Well, it all comes down to fundraising across state lines and really just managing your compliance in a smart way as your organization grows.
Here's the bottom line. Your grant seeking isn't happening in a vacuum. It's not separate from your other fundraising. So if you're based in one state and you apply for a grant from a private foundation that's located in another, you might have just triggered a registration requirement in that foundation's home state.
What this really means is that before you even hit send on that letter of inquiry or that full proposal, you've got to consider where that funder is located as part of your compliance checklist. It's all about being proactive, right? And just understanding that as your fundraising footprint grows, your compliance requirements are probably going to grow right along with it.
Okay, let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways here. First, and most importantly, not all grants are treated the same. Second, government grants are generally not considered solicitation. Third, grants from private foundations and corporations, those may be considered solicitation. And that leads to the fourth point. This can trigger a registration requirement in the funder's home state.
At the end of the day, this isn't about putting the brakes on your fundraising. It's actually about enabling it to grow safely. When you build this distinction into your compliance strategy, you stop reacting to problems and you start proactively managing your growth. The most successful organizations get this. They understand the critical question isn't just if you're soliciting, but also where and from whom.